welcome to stage our next round of speakers. I'll give names and institutions, and please take your seat on stage as I call you. First, we have Ndidi Nwuneli from Sahel Consulting. Welcome. We have Marcel Beukeboom, permanent representative to the Nations in Rome from the Netherlands. Welcome, Marcel. We have Richard Zaltman, interim COO of EIT Food. Welcome, Richard. We have Achim Hupperts, Vice President for Sustainability at DSM. Welcome. We have Saronwala, Chief Impact Officer at Infarm. Welcome. And we have Jane Nelson from the Kennedy School of Government. Suds, why don't you come here, please, and Jane would put you at that side. Great. Now, again, I've said this morning, I'm excited because I will be learning as much as you, right? We have, again, people who are really at the forefront of this field from a range of different perspectives. And I'll go through and, again, try and get some ideas on the table, but just like that we did in our last section, leave some time to allow you to ask your questions as well. So as we kick off, really, I want each speaker to also give a sense of who you're with and what you're seeing in innovation, again, from your own institution. But we really also want to push this conversation further. And so let me start actually with Ndidi, someone who I've worked with a bit over the years. And again, as Wanjiro was saying, has many views on what was just discussed. But in Ndidi, you've been really innovating a lot with Sahel and your network here. What are the innovations you're excited about from your side?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks for this fantastic convening. So I wear a number of hats, and I'll just talk about innovations from the SME lens. I'm the founder of Africa Food Change Makers, which is a network of entrepreneurs in 37 African countries, mostly SMEs in the food processing and food production landscape, attempting to scale. Now, the two innovations that we're seeing that are exciting us, one is around processing nutritious food from waste. And I'm so excited to see African entrepreneurs saying, you know what, we're going to create from what we have in our network. I'll give an example. Bonita Foods, one of our entrepreneurs, saw that 40 to 60% of our fruits and vegetables were going to waste. So she basically goes to markets close to the end of the day and buys up all the rotting fruits, and she makes them into snacks. High quality, tasty, and nutritious snacks. Now, the challenge with a lot of these entrepreneurs is that it's not affordable for the masses, right? And so what we're trying to help them do is pivot from saying, it's good, you're producing really high quality, well-branded snacks, but how can we reduce the price point? But that innovation is across the board. We're using what is in our local community and producing convenient, tasty, nutritious food. The issue is affordability. And this is the second thing I'll talk about, which is I'm a co-founder of a food company called Ace Foods. And we have struggled with the affordability piece, especially around nutritious food, because the price point keeps on getting lower. And we're talking about 30 cents. Egg right now is about 30 cents, right? 30 cents might seem very little to you for one egg, but it competes with an Indomie, a packet of instant noodles that's the same price. So how can we ensure that our nutritious food is priced on par and is as filling as the cheap food? So that's the challenge that we're facing, but we're seeing a lot of innovation. And one of the things we're trying to do is to partner with and we talked about partnership, with the research institutes, with the labs, with the innovators, with the large companies to build a supply chain. The second is technology, and everyone has talked about technology. We're seeing technology from farm to fork, improve seeds that are drought resistant, that have vitamin A. We're seeing that in cassava, in maize, in beans, and that's really exciting. Commercializing the great research from IITA, and we're doing that with Sahel Consulting. We're getting it into the field. Market linkages, so much innovation around using tech to link farmers to markets, to link farmers to consumers. And the last innovation that most excites me is chefs. We're making nutritious food cool. And we're seeing a whole renaissance of African food, not just locally, but globally. And African food, and that's my latest startup, is around changing narratives, ensuring that African food is recognized as world-class, is celebrated, and that the best of our food, the tefs, the moringas, the rooibos, that's not only nutritious, but tasty and healthy, is accepted and celebrated by the world and not seen as often or indigenous crops, but mainstream food that's packaged, that's convenient and affordable. So lots to do, but lots of innovation and exciting developments happening.
Great, thanks Ndidi. We'll come back to you. I appreciate that. I want to turn to Suds actually next, so maybe he'll take you the microphone. Suds at Infarm again. You've been thinking through again, how do we produce more to feed more but use less, right, in this new world? So what are your reflections on this and even on what Ndidi just said?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, and thank you everybody. So we always go back to the fundamental equation that Wageningen University put out, which is that we need to produce more food in the next 40 years than we've produced in the last 8,000. That is a dramatic equation. And we can't produce as much food in the same way because we just don't have the natural resource. So for us, the technology side of it, and I'll come from the second thing that you said, Ndidi, is addressing the technology aspect is where we're coming from in vertical farming, which is what we do. So how do you produce more with less? So while we transform systems that exist, how do you make those systems more efficient? How do you make those systems more regenerative, etc.? We believe that there's a parallel track where we need to create new forms of farming. So I'm a farmer. I may not be dressed as a traditional farmer, but that is the innovation that vertical farming brings, that we farm, we grow food for people to eat. We grow it in controlled environment systems, and these are what we call climate machines. So what Bertrand Piccard was talking about in terms of microclimates. Each farm is a microclimate. We can grow whatever food we need whenever it's needed. And that's really what it is, and it's about using as much as 90 to 95% less resource than you would use externally. So we are innovating, we are inventing. It comes with risks, it comes with investment, but this is where we need to look at if we're looking to create truly climate resilient systems for food production in a world which is somewhere on the continuum of 1.5 to 2.4, depending on where on the optimism barometer that person sits. So that's really what we want to make sure is, can we create food and nutritional security for the next decade or within the next decade in this changing world?
Thank you. I want to turn to Achim next. I think two very different contexts, I think, what we've just been talking through, and yet in some ways, again, many of those ideas and lessons are able to be taken throughout. DSM works in all these types of contexts. I've seen work, again, in Rwanda, but then also certainly in a European context as well. How are you thinking about the innovations that are emerging to address these current challenges? And I know just before this, you were mentioning that in some ways, the shock of COVID has really helped speed up innovation in some ways, where climate as kind of a more of a slower stress rather than a shock has taken a long time. What are your reflections on this?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on the panel, and I think it's a key question that you ask. Where does innovation take us, and do we have good examples? Well, let's step a little bit back, because you said we have a lot of time. Why did we end actually in the place where we are right now? I think we need to recognize that the food systems that we are facing right now are designed in this way. They were designed to bring calories to people, and they were designed on the principle of cheap energy and unconstrained logistics. And that doesn't work anymore. So when the conditions in the outside world have changed, we need obviously innovations to create a new food system. But the good news are we were capable to design the old food system. So we should have all the confidence that through innovation we can also make a significant change to how we produce food, how we consume food. Now, DSM is a company active in health, nutrition, and bioscience. We have actually more than 1,200 scientists around the globe working on the transformation of food systems. And there are a lot of exciting innovations already in the market or ready for market. Let's give an example on animal farming, production of animal proteins. Very often seen controversially. I'm sure you all know the factor of greenhouse gas emissions and this kind of production. The truth is that there is a lot of opportunity in improving this. There are now feed additives available in the market that allow to reduce the methane emission of cows and other cattle by roughly 30%, scientifically proven. We have one of these innovations, but there are of course others. But the problem is it took us almost 14 years from inventing the component into bringing it into the market. 14 years. Why did it take 14 years? Because it has to be tested actually more than even a pharmaceutical ingredient that you want to bring to the market. You mentioned regulatory constraints. It might be regulatory constraints, but the regulatory constraints serve something different. And Bertrand mentioned this, and I think I really love this example on cottage cheese. Why is the regulatory constraint there to put an expiry date on food like this? Because consumers need to be protected, want to be protected. This desire of protection drives the regulation. The desire of having everything tested out puts also a lot of pressure on companies, and the companies obey, of course, to this pressure. This is good. I don't criticize this, but we should be aware that it comes with a price of slow introduction of innovation in the market. With COVID, we learned actually that we can bring some groundbreaking innovations. Just think about that the kind of vaccines that is now in the market is completely different than in the past. This kind of innovation was brought in a severe crisis within half a year, 1 year to the market. Not by cutting corners, but by speeding up the innovation highway, basically. If we accept that food system crises are equally pressing, we have actually the opportunity, without cutting corners, also to accelerate these innovations. And while I mentioned the methane-reducing components, there are many more. There are solutions available to improve biodiversity of fish farming. Fish at the moment are fed with fish oil, that they have the sufficient levels of omega fat acids, which we need, the famous omega-3 and omega-6. At the moment, this fish oil is produced by catching little fish and squeezing the oil out of these fish, which impacts significantly the biodiversity and the ecosystem of oceans. There are actually solutions to produce this fish oil in a bioreactor right out of algae. As a consequence, the little fish can stay in the ocean, the fish farms still produce nutritious fish, and biosystems can actually rebalance. There's also innovation in go-to-market structures and how we collaborate with farmers. I really like the discussion we had on how do we get the farmers actually on board, how do we work with smallhold farmers. I think that's what the industry actually has to learn. We have to learn how to communicate and interact with stakeholders which are not our home grounds. And for farmers, it's all about culture, it's about history, it's about the connection with the land. And we come in with our scientific voices, and that very often doesn't work. But there are innovations for new business models. So Ndidi knows this very well, and you, Adam. We work, for example, in Africa on an activity which we call Africa Improve Food, where we buy from local farmers local stable food. We have a local factory in Rwanda in place where we add nutritious ingredients and fortify this food, and we bring it back to the market. We have often the discussion, is this philanthropic for DSM or if there is really business behind it? It is not a business which has the same profitability as others of our businesses, but it's not profitable, not philanthropic. It makes profit. More importantly, we learn actually how to work in these ecosystems. And this is also kind of innovation, because we do not only have to have the scientific innovation, we also need the social innovations, how we collaborate with other societies, other groups. These are a few of these examples. And I'm personally really an optimist. We have the capabilities, we have the knowledge, we only have to have the will to put it in place.
Thank you so much. I want to pick up on something you said, and I'll go to Marcel next, actually. So if we pass the mic along to him, I think, you're talking a bit about, again, this regulatory framework, issues of consumer safety. There's different pieces, again, around the enabling environment, again, of how do we allow these innovations to come to market? How do we allow them to scale for food system transformation? I think really through the Dutch government, as I was talking about the movement earlier today, was really one of the champions early on of the Food System Summit process, worked closely with us on this vision overall. And I know, Marcel, you're still at the center of this discussion now in Rome with the UN food agencies. Can you tell us a little bit again around what you think is possible to keep building the enabling environment for food systems?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And indeed, just also a little bit about my background. This is not my first COP, as I could call this my habitat for years as the former climate envoy of the Netherlands. And then I moved to Rome, to the, what you say, the food and agricultural space, where the timing, I think, was right. And you referred to the Food Systems Summit. That has become the talk of the town. That has become increasingly the lens through which we look at the changes that need to take place. So for that reason, I think we do see an uptake in attention for food and food systems at this COP, which is a good thing. And with my background, I see it also a little bit as my mission to connect the dots. And that is exactly what I would like to do in this panel as well. What I'm going to say is putting a lot of what we have heard so far in connection to each other. So connecting the dots here as well. And I would like to do that thinking of the title of this session. The session is called Innovation Driving Food Systems Transformation. I would like to focus on that second part, the food systems transformation. What do we actually understand of that concept? What do we mean when we talk about food systems transformation? And what am I going to say now, you will recognize, because Bertrand already had it in his introduction and several others mentioned parts of that. First, on the food system itself. A food system is a system that produces a sufficient, safe and healthy food for a growing population. And that is, I think, something that has been mentioned, but that is good to keep in the back of our mind. But that's not the only thing. We have to think of an equitable distribution of costs and profits. I think that was a little bit of the theme of your fireside chat. On the one place there's too much, and in other places there's too little. And thirdly, and that is the relevance of us being here, we need to adapt that system to climate change. We should sustainably use the resources both of land and that nature provides us. And then I would like to add one more component to this concept, and that is the term resilience. So we have to work on a food system that is resilient to shocks. And stressors. So that is the concept I try to explain a little bit here. Against the background, and you referred to my role on this panel, I'm the representative of a government here, of a regulator. This is about governance, but governance is not the sole responsibility of governments. This is something that we have to do together. I will get back to that later, but this is something that the public sector, the private sector and civil society has to do collectively. That transformation that we are talking about here today is urgent because of the shocks we are experiencing, but also of the shocks that we can predict will come. And this is not a surprise to you, and in fact you're looking at us here, we are looking at a screen behind you where I'm constantly reminded of all the shocks that are taking place. Climate change is in my face here, literally. So climate change is one of those big shocks, and it comes in all kinds of forms, as you know. I don't have to explain that to you. What is actual at this moment, too, is, of course, conflict as a shock to our food system. The one hitting the headlines is, of course, the war in Ukraine, but that's definitely not the only one. This is man-made, but it's also in our face. Thirdly, partly a result of that, economic crisis also comes in all kinds of forms, but when we focus on this sector, it might be in food price hikes, it might be in a higher cost of production of energy and things like that. And also another bucket of shocks we recognized recently as pandemics, but also plagues in food production. So there are so many that it's, yeah, you could become depressed of it, but if you approach it systematically, there might be answers to that. So the question here is, how do we build resilient food systems? And I'm borrowing heavily here from work that has been done by Wageningen University from the Netherlands, from my country, done in the context of the Food Systems Summit. And they came up with a concept called the ABCD of resilience building. And I will go by the A, the B, the C, and the D. And I will do that quickly. And I hope you will recognize many of the elements that have been mentioned by previous speakers. First of all, the A. That is the A of agency. Or in other words, the ability of people to choose their actions and execute them. What do we mean by that? We mean that and I think this also was mentioned in the fireside chat, we should not think of people as a kind of passive objects that just have shock coming over them and wait until they are over and then react. No, they are not passive victims. There is a lot of resilience already in local systems. And if you recognize that and utilize that, it allows for a lot of anticipation and prevention of the severe results that shocks could have. Think of all kinds of coping strategies in the informal economy, early warning systems that do exist in communities, communal seed systems. There are many examples of what we could put under this label of agency. Then the B, and again, it has been mentioned in examples. The B is of buffering. You have to build buffers in the system in order to make it more resilient. And that basically goes from all level. A buffer at farm level, whether it is seeds or stocks, at sector level, national level. It could be financial, it could be food, it could be seeds. Is definitely necessary to make a system more resilient. But it's also a choice, because if you do that, if you keep larger stocks, your profit will go down. And that is, of course, a choice that needs to be taken. And someone needs to be able to accept that lower profit, whether it is the private company, whether it is the tax revenue service or the government in general. But that is a price we have to pay for a longer term resilience. But we also recognize here that if you go down that route, that the ones that have to give in might object something like that. So that could potentially be a difficult discussion to have. Then I get to the C. That is the C of connectivity. If you build a more sophisticated fabric within your society, your sector, whether it is connectivity in the digital term, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is communications, it helps you to become more agile and resilient when a shock happens, because you can much quicker switch in markets, in resources, in storage capacity, in what have you. You can think of examples yourselves. If you're not alone there, of course, you become more resilient to those shocks. And that does something to the ones with which you form a network, of course, because if you quickly change from the one supplier to the other, there is a disadvantage to the one that you are leaving. But if it is a balanced system, it comes to the benefit of all. Then finally, Adam, the D of diversity. And diversity, again, it has a little bit to do with that C, but diversity comes in all forms as well. And research tells us, and this is, I think, already common knowledge, especially in an environment like this, the most important form of diversity is biodiversity. It has been proven that biodiverse food and agro systems are more resilient to shocks of all the kinds that I mentioned than others. But this implies something to the agro system that we have designed, and Achim referred to that as well. Those have been choices in the past that we human beings have made. The system as we know it is our system. If we want to change it, we need to fundamentally change it. We might perhaps go to smaller plots, to more diversity on farm, to different landscapes. In my country, we currently go through very difficult political and societal discussions because we need to change our system. We have gone over the planetary boundaries of our agro system big time. And it's not easy to change that, but that is the kind of debate that needs to take place in politics, in society, in the private sector, because the way we have organized ourselves now is not sustainable. Then a few points maybe for discussion coming out of all this. Of course, and it has been mentioned, multi-stakeholder partnerships are essential for that. Bertrand mentioned also cross-sectoral. Yes, necessary, because there will be trade-offs if you approach a food system like this. It will bring back trust. Many of you know, walking in this multilateral environment, trust is gone, the system is broken, and it needs to be built back up. And for that we need to understand each other, speak each other's language, and also give in a little bit, which brings me to the second point, equality or inequality. Our system is not balanced, is not equal. And one of the biggest examples of that is that a lot of power in our global food system rests with a few multinational players, the traders, some of the monopolists in the system. Again, this is what research tells us. If we want to change that system, we need to address those inequalities as well and perhaps break some of those powers in the system. Again, a difficult decision and a difficult discussion, and talking from a public perspective, this is politically very sensitive. It might affect the economic value and the profit capacities of your economy. But again, if you put your eyes on the long-term horizon, this is the discussion that we need to have. And then finally, back to the theme of this session, innovation. One conclusion from everything that I've said is that innovation is indeed necessary, but it's not the only thing. We will not be able to innovate ourselves out of these crises. More needs to be done. We need to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. This is financial, this is legal, this is policy. So maybe not the kind of innovation, talking about food system transformation and food system resilience that you might have expected, but this is, and I drop it on the table for discussion, something that needs. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marcel. And covered a lot of ground there, although you picked up on a point also that another speaker picked up on, it, the fact that the system is not broken, right? This is something we debated often in the Food Systems Summit, but a lot of times people say the system is broken, we need to fix it. We have a system, it actually is working the way that we've built it. The challenge is we want a new system, right? And so how do we then actually deconstruct some of the things that are holding where it is today if we want to move? As our next speaker, I want to turn to Jane Nelson, actually, and then I'll come back to Richard. There are a few pieces that, again, have been mentioned around multi-stakeholder platforms, power, the enabling environment again. And Jane, you've been doing a lot of work and research on this, and so I want to turn to you for your reflections.
Great. Yep. Thanks very much, Adam, and wonderful to be here, and wonderful to see Food Systems Pavilion, as you say, actually seeing food at much more at the heart of COP is really exciting. And I think the other very exciting thing about this COP is the focus on climate justice, just transition, and a much more sort of people-centered approach. And that this is about people's lives and livelihoods, and and how do we ensure that those are protected and supported and enhanced. And I think I want to just highlight what I see as sort of three critical levels of innovation that we're seeing and that we need a lot more of, and we need the linkages between them. And all of them have been discussed. And the first is sort of technology, product and service innovation. And I think we've heard some great examples of, at the farm level, at the processing, at the waste management level, the transport level, the manufacturing, processing and nutrition level, the retailing level, and that combination of new technologies and products and services is really exciting. I think one of the most exciting aspects, and Ndidi had an example, and this gentleman in the audience earlier had an example of that interface, and Achim, you also did, that interface between biotechnology and digitalisation and information technology. And I think for far too long, the worlds of sort of life science technologies and biotechnologies and the digital information world have been sort of in parallel or silos. And that interface of those technologies, I think, is very exciting all across the food value chain. I think the second level of technology innovation, which to me is very exciting, is what I'd sort of call institutional, or I can describe it as social innovation, in terms of how do we organize. And so the new business models, Infarm, vertical farming, a fundamentally new way of organizing. Wangari talked about new types of extension services. How do we revolutionize farmer cooperatives and help them to become not just cooperatives but collective business units, like some of the wonderful work that Ndidi is doing. The Africa Improved Farms Food Initiative. There's so many new ways of organizing that I think we're just beginning to tap into, some of which are technology enabled and some of which are about culture change, behavior change, just new ways of thinking, how we organize business models, value chains and financing models. So I think that's the sort of second area of innovation which is very exciting, and obviously partnerships are a key element of that new institutional organizing innovation. And non-traditional partnerships, I think, is an area we need to be looking at. And one I put out, which hasn't been discussed on the panel so far, we have the food companies at the table around food systems. We have increasingly the information technology companies, the biotech companies. But what about mining companies, energy companies, other industry sectors who might not be producing and manufacturing and selling food, but can have an input along the value chain? So that's the second area, as I say, institutional innovation. And then the third area would be, and Marcel, you touched on it, policy innovation. And I think we need to put policy in the innovation bucket, because we need to fundamentally rethink how we think about policies. And so repurposing agricultural subsidies. We're not going to get rid of agricultural subsidies, so how do we repurpose them that they're actually subsidizing climate smart, nutritious, inclusive food production and food manufacturing? I mean, how do we at a government level make sure that the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Energy are coordinating? And I think there's some great examples emerging. Kenya's Agricultural Innovation Office in the President's office, trying to link different ministers together. From a donor perspective, Norway's Sustainable Food System Strategy, which is how do they put food systems and priorities into their global development strategy and their aid and their donor strategy. So I think at a policy level, there are enormous opportunities as well to think innovation and policy in the same category. And a link there would also be around research and development. And I think that's both institutional innovation but also policy innovation. I think some of the great work that CGIAR has done in recent years is saying, yes, it's about agricultural productivity, but we've got to take a broader food systems approach. We've got to work more with nutrition research, not just agri-research, etc. So I think those are the three areas I'm really excited about. I think there's enormous potential. The technology, product and service innovation, there's institutional innovation and policy innovation. And then the final point I'd make are who are the champions, who are the ambassadors, both individuals as well as institutions, who are helping to make those links between those different levels of innovation and make them more available. So I was really interested in Bertrand's example of the 1,000 innovations they've identified. How do we get those out there? How do we, as Wangari said, make farming sexy again? And I think the innovation agenda is one of the ways to do that. And I finally close with sort of saying that from the youth perspective, the enormous potential of a sort of digitally enabled young population around the world. How do we get them engaged? both as farmers, but again, right along the food value chain. And I think the idea of ambassadors, Ndidi's example of chefs, other ambassadors to make this exciting and as well as good livelihoods and good opportunities for people is enormous. So very exciting.
Great. Thank you, Jane. I want to then move to Richard. And I think just picking up on that, the innovations across technology, institution, the policy spaces, how do we move these forward? And EIT, right, very, very much looking at these kinds of collaborative spaces, pre-competitive spaces to be innovating in all of these dimensions. What are the lessons you're seeing in terms of moving from innovation to impact?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Adam. And it's fascinating how all these things come together. Wanjira mentioned the benefit of partnerships. We are an innovation partnership with organizations like DSM. So that's core to our DNA to look at these challenges. But in all honesty, if we look back, we have been too focused on point solutions. So Bertrand said there are 1,400 solutions out there. There are many, many more than 1,400 solutions out there, but there's a human desire to look for the perfect solution. What's the answer? Not what is the next best thing we can do. And one of the things we'd love to do is open a bit more space for thinking about how do we get good enough going and get that momentum building to market. When we think about the big challenges, there are lots of solutions aching to break free. There are technology solutions from alternative proteins to regenerative agriculture practices to feedstock. And of course, today, a great sprinkling of AI, of blockchain, of deep tech, kind of over that like fairy dust. But you've got to bring all of that together. And there are three things that we think will make a difference to bringing those things together at scale, but also bringing them together with a mindset of good enough, get going, build momentum. The first of those is, as you said, pre-competitive spaces. Look, we're all here in a very, very friendly environment. Everybody's here because we want to make a difference. But at the end of the day, there are commercial, competitive situations that are a reality in the world we live in. However, many of these challenges we have a common baseline. And hopefully appropriately, since we're in Africa, there's an African proverb that I'm sure everyone knows: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And in a way, we need to go fast and we need to go far. And that collaboration on the setting, the foundations to go far is really important. I'll give an example. One of our partners, Pepsi, they have their sustainability mandate, PEP Plus. Part of that is to reduce waste. What they can't do is source sustainable packaging, sustainable plastics for their bottles very effectively. Now, that same challenge is faced by everybody who puts anything in a plastic bottle. And there's no real competitive advantage to the bottle. There's a competitive advantage to what is in the bottle. So if you work together on a challenge like that, that's where the pre-competitive space is really important, of putting your collective shoulders to the wheel on the stuff that doesn't really immediately confer competitive advantage. That's a good place to start. And then you build from there into probably more challenging areas. We're also seeing that in our Carbon Plus coalition, 14 different organizations coming together from different perspectives, different commercial spaces. Some of them are competitive, but all looking at how does regenerative agriculture support us collectively and rise the tide for everybody. The second area we're focused on is knowledge exchange. Now, knowledge exchange is critical, but comes with a big but. It's not a one-way street. And underpinning knowledge exchange means we need to make sure it's equitable for everyone and everyone actually gains. There can be quite a lot of you show me yours and I'll tell you a little bit about mine, especially in the world of finance. Like, you give us everything, and if we're happy with it, we'll give you a little bit of something back. That's not going to work. What we need, again, underpinned by that pre-competitive safe space, is a real bilateral, equitable knowledge sharing. However, food systems are global, climate change impact is global, but capacity to adapt to change is not global. And underpinning knowledge exchange has to be capacity building. So that's something we really want to look at as well with our partners more, is how do you avoid a situation of intellectual food aid where you create a dependency on that one-way flow of knowledge capital, which continues to divide, let's say, the global north from the global south. I think there are some great cross-sectoral examples of this. Wanjira mentioned M-Pesa. For me, M-Pesa is a brilliant example of where knowledge exchange and technology exchange was underpinned by capacity building. Without that local understanding of how to deploy mobile technology, how to use mobile solutions, M-Pesa would not have been successful, and that was a key foundation of the work that they did. So how do we take those successful components of knowledge exchange, and in particular capacity building, to create absorptive capacity and deploy them along with the innovation approach we want to have? And lastly, fairly motherhood and apple pie, but everyone needs to be involved. And I think that, again, is something, it's easy to bring the inventors in, it's easy to bring the banks in, it's relatively easy to bring the producers in. It's very difficult, actually, to truly bring in the voice of farmers, and at the other end, the voice of people, humans who eat food and understand the choices that they make. So for us, that third component of everyone really means everyone is really important. And I can't say we've got a magic bullet for that, but it has to be woven into the process.
Thank you, Richard. I think, so what we're going to do now, we're going to open it up, again, have a little bit of a forum. So again, we'll welcome questions and comments. And the first one is actually here from Suds, who raised his hand, wants to come back in around something that was said, but we'll turn to questions.
Thank you, Adam. Just something that you said I just wanted to build on, which was related to the pre-competitive part of it. And I just wanted to bring out as one of the few practitioners over here, in terms of bringing the industry together from vertical farming is maybe 10 years old tops, right? And what we're trying to do is bring the practitioners together to define climate and nature standards early on. That's pre-competitive. Now, whether we use a different form of AI and they use a different form of water management, that may be competitive advantage. But for all of us to be reporting under SBTI, for example, is pre-competitive and credibility building. So this is something that we're driving together with the vertical farming industry, as well as the next stage of the agri-tech industry, whether it be cultivated meat, whether it be insect farming, for example. So there's different levels that we can play with on the pre-competitive space. So I just wanted to underline how important that is in the overall scheme of things.
Thank you. So I'm just going to keep an eye out. I have plenty of questions myself. So if I don't see hands, I'll go to my next one. But right here in the front, please.
Thank you very much. I am Samia from Sudan. I am asking, in Sudan we have a problem in post-harvest technology, because most of the farmer is a small farmer and buyer as open market. So in case of groundnut, we have damage by aflatoxin. So we need dryer by solar energy or another. Another thing about the cold chain, we have lack of cold chain infrastructure. So most of the market is open market. So need solution or game changing for this post-harvest storage. Thanks for you.
Thank you. Let me turn to Ndidi on that one, if I can.
Thank you so much. So you're spot on. And when anybody asks me where is the place that needs the most investment in Africa on the value chain, I would say it's agro-processing. And we've underinvested in that, along with supporting SMEs that are in agro-processing to scale. So that's why I started Africa Food Change Makers. It's a one-stop shop hub that has data, information, access to funding, access to experts, and technology. So please, number one, join African Food Change Makers. It's free and it's online, okay? Number two, each of us needs to understand that, and this is where the policy comes in, and I want to pick up on what Jane talked about and what you talked about. We believe that we have incubation centers in many parts of our continent, but they are too weak, especially when it comes to local fabrication of equipment. Ace Foods, like you said, I have a food processing company that I started 13 years ago along with my husband, and aflatoxin was an issue that we saw in our soya bean and in our maize, and we had to bring in equipment from China. We had to bring in steam sterilizers to get rid of the mold growth and the microbial load. every time the machine breaks down, we have to fly in somebody from China to fix it. Meanwhile, in Nigeria, at least 4 centers that are focused on local fabrication, local processing, training of fabricators, but they are still operating in the 1970s. We need to invest in strengthening the technical capacity of our people to create world-class equipment, and this is where the knowledge sharing comes in. I looked at your institute because I was excited about what we can do globally to build local capacity for equipment fabrication and maintenance, because maintenance is even more important. Leveraging, and this is where I love what Jane said, bringing in the technology partners, bringing in the energy partners to think about sustainable approaches to drying at the farm gate and lowering the cost of those interventions at the farm gate so that we leave more money with the farmer and across the value chain, the consumer ultimately benefits. So we're thinking a lot about this, and I'm happy to collaborate with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndidi. I have another question here, just in the front.
Thank you very much. Greg Garrett, Executive Director of Access to Nutrition Initiative. I wanted to ask about the pre-competitive platforms because we're benchmarking the world's largest manufacturers, food and beverage manufacturers, so from Nestle to Unilever and Friesland Campina and others. And we've started to raise the idea of could we work with them also on a pre-competitive platform on a number of different issues, bioavailability of micronutrients and alternative proteins, for example. So it's a comment, it's an invitation, but also a question maybe to the colleague at EIT, how could we work with the food and beverage manufacturers to on pre-competitive measures that are about sustainable nutrition? Thank you.
Yeah, so there is no kind of single formula for this, much like many recipes really. There's lots of ways you can cook this up. I'd say the first thing that we've worked through is have a really clear objective for that pre-competitive space. If it's a general fairly open agenda, you'll get great collaboration, you'll get great intent, but you don't have that focus on what are you actually trying to achieve here. And I think that's been something we learned pretty quickly and are now trying to respond to make sure that where we create that space, there's a real focus for it. The second thing is understanding and being very, very open about where the competitive lines are. So we're, and I hope they don't mind me saying this, but we're hoping to bring Coke and Pepsi together in the same room. Now, that will work in a very soft, everyone enjoys the coffee and croissants way, whatever happens, but it will work and achieve impact if we're clear on these are the lines we're not going to cross. And I think that's something, again, we've learned through the process of setting up these structures. And the third is bring real diversity into it. So whilst you're talking about the beverage manufacturers, bring others in, because those voices that you might not have expected to be involved in that conversation often spark the safe conversations, or what start as the safe conversations that then blossom, that otherwise beverage to beverage or food to food wouldn't necessarily have had. So that might be students themselves from universities, it might be farmers, it might be consumer groups, or it might be deep tech. Get an AI startup in the room just for the hell of it, and I guarantee they will do really amazing things as a catalyst within that forum.
I'll go to Jane, and then I want to come back to Achim as well.
And just to add one other comment on the focus bit, you do such great work at looking at what some of the constraints are and the sort of enabling constraints. And I think identifying one or two of the enabling constraints is where the pre-competitive space really works. And so I think that's where it'd be great to focus, and be fantastic if the index did start working on pre-competitive initiatives. So thank you.
Thanks, Jane. And Achim, DSM might be one of those companies within a pre-competitive space. What would be your perspectives on that?
First of all, I like to build on what was said before. So when we look at pre-competitive collaborations, what we realize is you have to make it small, specific, and then you have to engage the whole value chain actually. And that helps you on one side to address also the competitive concerns. On the other side, we try to change a very complex and a very big system actually. And if you look at food system, then everybody will understand something different. So when you break it down and you say, hey, we want to put an eye on soy production in Brazil, or we look at dairy production in the Netherlands, to give two examples where we have a bit more our feet in, and bring then all the value chain players together. Then you make it very specific, and then you can also come with concrete conclusions, concrete KPIs, how to measure progress. And you can use this then actually as an toolbox, as a training concept that you can afterwards spread into other regions on other challenges. But that's a bit the approach. So start small, start along the whole value chain, and then learn from this and optimize your process.
Thank you. I want to go to a question here from the audience.
Yes, thank you. Tilahun is my name. I work for Agra in Africa. My question is, the food system in African continent is driven by non-food system drivers. One is really, lack of rural energy. If you see what's happening in the system, farmers open up new land, 3-4 years they produce enough food, yield declines, and move on to the next plot, move on to the wetlands, to the mountains, to the forests, and whatever they produce also on farm in terms of biomass is going to fire. That is what people are using for cooking, for light. So we keep, mining our resource base, and we keep also expanding, exposure to climate change, drought, and other extreme events. So, whatever we preach, unless we really manage the land-based resources better, the land and water resources, I don't think we can achieve, food security and food systems. So my question to you is, how do we do that? Can we bring in the energy, the small-scale energy opportunity to Africa first, before to achieve, even like 80-60% of what we preach about, rather than push only the agriculture side of it? Thank you.
Tilahun. Any panelists who would like to come in on that first? Ndidi, please.
So what excites me about what is happening is we're seeing technology come up around new approaches to growing. So we've talked about aeroponics, we've talked about vertical farming. The challenge that remains is how to reduce the price points for those interventions. So yam is one of our value chains, and we're partnering with the CGIAR and with funding from Gates Foundation to introduce aeroponics for growing yam. Yam is a very high value, high cultural crop that is very well embraced in our country. Now what we found is they're using aeroponics, they're using greenhouse technology, and they're using solar. But the price point for farmers to adopt it is about $4,000. You need to bring it down to closer to $200 to $400 and ensure that it's sustainable. And this is where you need the partnerships. If we don't have the energy companies working alongside the fabrication companies and the local expertise, will not scale. But the technologies are there in every single way. It's just too expensive for the smallholder farmer. My challenge, and he stole my quote. I often use the same quote he used. And I said, we need to go fast and far together. And to do that, we need to work with humility, excellence, and agility. And we need to leave our egos and logos behind. And one of the reasons we haven't moved fast enough in scaling is the egos and logos. And that's why I love what, of course, I'm biased, but Rockefeller Foundation is doing with GAP, because it's Bezos, IKEA, and Rockefeller coming together to say, Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, how can we address the energy issues at the country level in high generating income opportunities like ag, right? And so they're starting. But it's a combination of effort. Nobody can do it alone. And we need more of those type of partnerships and more of those type of collaborations to really scale the interventions that already exist.
Indeed. So as we come to the end, actually, that gives me a good framing for what I want to do to close. I actually want to come back through the entire panel. I'll start with Jane, actually. And I want to just hear, again, here at COP27, we have partners both in this space, but also atypical partners around that we'd want to engage with. And what is your ask of, one or two key partners if we're going to be driving more of these innovations for food system transformation here in the coming 1 to 2 years?
Well, I always love what Ndidi says, and I think that leave your egos and logos behind. And I think, my ask is, how do we think more about this pre-competitive space, both within the food industry, but bringing in energy companies, transport companies, advertising companies, in terms of getting it out there on social media, etc. How do we think from the business perspective of pre-competitive space within food and agribusiness companies, but also other sectors, and bringing them in?
Marcel.
I am active, and I was active at a very abstract level. Let's say multilateral negotiations are far away from what's happening in the field. Yet at the same time, international agreements are necessary to combat climate change, to reduce the loss of biodiversity, etc., etc. But what I said in the beginning, connecting the dots between those different layers is essential, but also between the different silos. We tend to discuss those issues in isolation. So my plea to all of you is here, whether you are in one sector or two, but please go out here in this huge space to connect dots, for example, to the pavilion on the other side that deals with water, but also after the COP to keep the eyes on what we are talking about here and for the transformation of that system. And maybe, sorry to take one more sentence, in the reaction to the partnership thing, one thing that is often going wrong is that people do not really have the same idea of each other's role in a partnership. Governments or private sector representatives are often seen as financiers, but they can be so much more, including knowledge partners, leaving short-term interests behind, and that is not always acknowledged. And that would be another plea, to sit together when you form a partnership, to be transparent about your roles and what you bring to the table.
Thank you. Achim.
Well, also my theme would be collaboration. Nobody can make the transition on their own. But I would also like to challenge a bit what was said. If you want to go alone, go fast. If you want to go far, go together. Because what we see also is that you can actually go faster when you go with others. We went over investment hurdles by partnering with peers. We went over hurdles to have quick access to markets where we were not strong by collaborating with peers. And we see also collaboration opportunities by collaborating with partners down the value stream or up the value stream. So it's not only pre-competitive collaboration, it's collaboration along all the lines. And if we get our knowledge together in a way that everybody also has an equal stake in the profit and the benefits of the change, I think we can actually also go fast by working together.
Yeah, I really relate to what Bertrand said about reframing this as the opportunity and the forward-looking perspective. Yeah, we're in deep trouble. Let's not hide the fact. But I think when the world was faced with moving from the horse to the train, no one said the train's too expensive. No one said it's too expensive to move away from candles when electricity was on the table. The solutions are there, the opportunities are there, and for us looking at that as a system, it's so much bigger than any one of those technology solutions. This is bigger than horse to rail, it's bigger than candle to light. It's a total system transformation that, as that gentleman's last question highlighted, covers energy all the way through to the mouthful of food you put on the table, and that system has got so much potential to grow economies locally, to transform people's lives. That's what I find really exciting, and I'd love that pre-competitive space to focus on the upside, not the challenge narrative.
Thank you. Ndidi.
I agree with everybody, and I'll take a different stance. I think local organizations and SMEs matter. And I want to give a practical challenge to Adam and the team. We have missed an opportunity here at COP. What are we serving as food? Croissant, imported wheat, when we know that Egypt imports 90% of the wheat, right? Instead of giving opportunities for local chefs and entrepreneurs in Egypt to man each of the booths and give us sustainable, nutritious food that's sourced locally. That for me, if I was going to write an op-ed about COP, it's a missed opportunity. And so my challenge is wherever we can and whenever we're in a room to make a decision like that, prioritize local entrepreneurs and local organizations. Give them visibility, celebrate them, and let them shine. So Adam and all the influencers here, COP28, we cannot have the same mistake. We need to prioritize local organizations. Representation matters, mindset matters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndidi. And Suds.
Thank you. So just taking up from what you said about the horse to the train, and I was going to use the horse-drawn carriage to the car, so thank you for stealing mine as well, not just Ndidi's quote. But I think that as we take the innovation forward, we should just keep in mind that the innovation is never going to be one size fits all. And that's where the partnerships matter, because innovation will be adopted and adapted in different ways, in different geographies, in different countries. And we see that already. Whichever country I start looking into, whichever country, there is a form of controlled environment agriculture that has started. It doesn't have to be the same. It's unique to that place because it's important and relevant to that place. So the partnerships allow technologies to travel, allow them to get adopted and adapted. So collaborate, create the right technology, because we will need to create climate resilient systems, whether we like it or not. And we don't want to be sitting 10 years from today saying we should have done that.
Great, thank you, Sud. So as we close, I think several key points. I think one, we have the solutions, we need to scale them. Two, shocks can actually help us move faster. Again, I took that away early on. And so right now with this food crisis, let's use it and make sure we move faster just like we did during COVID. This clearly requires collective action and partnerships all around, breaking down the silos, building pre-competitive spaces, innovation ecosystems. So let's continue to drive on how we do that. But I think also the piece that came through started to, and we didn't pick up on it too much, but we need champions in order to move this forward. I think, I was reflecting on the fact I lived in Kenya for 7 years and I never adapted M-Pesa, have never used it once. So as widespread as that is, someone like me didn't use it partly because I didn't need to, but sometimes you need champions to push things through even when they're scaling. It's essential. And I think, my reflection on the food piece, just so you don't think that I had anything to do with the food here, was that last night I actually had the best lentil soup I have ever eaten in my life at a local restaurant. And I was thinking, I just want a vat of that lentil soup here every day so we can be eating it. But I think my reflection is that we need champions like Ndidi, like all of our speakers here today, to be the ones bringing these messages through all of you in the room. It's your championing that's going to actually help us drive things for the next COP, for these systems changes at all levels. So I want to say thank you to our speakers, thank you to our pavilion hosts here in the Food System Pavilion, and please a round of applause for everyone.